Welcome everybody who has joined so far. We will give a few more seconds, maybe about a minute, for additional attendees to join us and then get started. Hello everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on our recent publication of the FSC Regulatory Module, our system-wide changes, and a really quick look into the FSC Risk Assessment Framework. This webinar today offers simultaneous translation into 2 languages, which are our FSC official languages of Spanish and French. For those who are interested to access the interpretation services into Spanish or French, please go ahead and use the globe icon that you can find in the toolbar at the bottom of this webinar and select the language which you would like to use. Today, we will give you more detail on FSC's offering to align with EUDR with our FSC Aligned Certification for EUDR. Firstly, we have some system-wide changes, then our regulatory module. We will also just briefly review our risk assessment framework and then give a little insight into what we've learned so far when applying these tools. The question and answer session will happen at the end of today's presentation. The presentation part should take no more than 50 minutes to allow for enough time for the questions to be answered afterwards. I have my expert colleagues on the call with me today who will help answer the questions after the presentation. Note that this presentation is indeed recorded and will be made available on FSC's YouTube channel and applicable website pages. We do expect a lot of questions today and are intending to get to as many as possible. In order to efficiently address the most popular questions, we ask that you upvote a question that you also find applicable. So to place your questions and upvote, go ahead and use the icon that you can see on the screen here, and then click a thumbs up on any existing question. Please also protect your own privacy by ensuring you submit all questions anonymously. So let's get started. As a quick reminder, we hope you have a brief understanding already what the EUDR is about. If not, please visit the relevant resources on the EU's web pages, as well as fsc.org/EUDR. Links will be placed in the chat. But in brief, EUDR requires that products traded into the EU must demonstrate that they are deforestation and degradation free, produced in accordance with relevant legislation, and include information collection such as geolocation and traceability with demonstrated due diligence. To meet these changes, FSC has launched our sophisticated solution around EUDR Aligned, with FSC Aligned Certification for EUDR, further powered by our system-wide changes that affect our certification system beyond just EUDR. And these are accelerated changes to align with the intention of our own policy to address conversion as well as the EUDR. A lot of work went into the development of these requirements, not just from within FSC, but with our stakeholders as well. Let's take a quick look into how we got here.
The EU Regulation on Deforestation-Free Products, EUDR, came into force in June 2023. FSC standards are some of the world's most robust, but we asked ourselves, do they align with EUDR? To find out, we analyzed our certifications against the EUDR requirements. What we found was promising. Our forest management certification already met most EUDR requirements, sometimes exceeding them. Our chain of custody certification also met many requirements, with space to evolve. We accelerated the development of FSC Trace and created a new standard as an optional add-on. We expanded our risk assessment framework and held a powerful public consultation. 30 days, 400 plus participants, 2,000 plus open comments. We interviewed and surveyed almost 400 affected companies to understand their needs and made improvements based on their feedback. We launched the FSC Aligned for EUDR Early Adopter Program, selecting 20 plus companies for the first wave, and more direct onboarding planned as it expands. We convened, listened, learned, enhanced, fine-tuned, and are ready to release the first components of FSC Aligned for EUDR. Thank you to everyone who played a part in this journey so far.
So the consultation mentioned is our 30-day simultaneous public consultation that happened back in February through March 1st of this year of the regulatory module, FSC's risk assessment framework, and the system-wide changes presented in advice notes. When we look a little closer into the results of this consultation, in summary, some of the highlights are that all regions were represented, with around half of the responses coming from outside of Europe. And around half of the responses came from non-members, which exemplifies wide interest of companies, which is reflected on the right with certificate holders as the largest group of participants. Also, please note the wide range of stakeholder groups reached who actively gave feedback. Now, let's look into our final requirements for FSC Aligned certification for EUDR. If you want to learn more about these consultation results, we are placing some reports in the links in the chat. We have some system-wide changes. These are important because they are system-wide and affect those even outside of the EUDR. Our system-wide changes are presented in advice notes and some interpretations, which are mainly about closing the differences with FSC and EUDR, but also to align with the intention of our policy to address conversion. We have 5 advice notes newly published, 4 are new, and 1 is revised. We've also published 8 interpretations. These interpretations should be familiar as they were included previously within the regulatory module and part of the consultation. Now these interpretations have been updated for additional clarity and published under a complementary document called the FSC Regulatory Module Explanatory Materials. They're also included in our interpretations documents in the Document Center. Maybe you aren't so familiar with advice notes and interpretations in the FSC system. So for those that might not be super familiar with how our set of requirements, which is called the normative framework, actually works, it is comprised of a set of different types of normative documents represented on this slide here. We have policies, standards, and procedures for the most part. To support the implementation of these types of documents, we have advice notes, directives, and interpretations. Advice notes are amendments of selected requirements, and they are compiled into directives documents, which are where you can find these new advice notes. A formal clarification is called an interpretation, which we also publish new ones of. So when referring to system-wide changes, many of these changes have been actualized through the publication of these 3 types of requirements. And when we published the draft version of these documents for consultation, responses did result in some changes in the advice notes and interpretations. We clarified non-human induced deforestation, limited the prohibition of sales with FSC claims to the EUDR definition of deforestation and degradation free. We also clarified applicable dates and the purpose of the primary forest advice note and updated the interpretations further. So now let's review these changes. We have an advice note on deforestation-free products from FSC certified management units. What we heard from the consultation is that our stakeholders want to tighten the definition of deforestation-free to reflect that of EUDR, where EUDR focuses on the transformation to agricultural use. So the advice note now then closes potential gaps between FSC forest management certification requirements with EUDR's definition of deforestation free. In the consultation, the proposal was that we would prohibit the sales of products from all limited conversion. As mentioned, now we've tightened the scope to be closer to EUDR for the specific scenarios where there is a difference in FSC and EUDR's definitions of deforestation and degradation. With the advice note, now products cannot be sold as FSC certified if they are resulting from conversion of natural forest or lasting transformation of plantations into agricultural use, which is not human-induced, such as a natural disaster. Nor can products be FSC certified if resulting from exceptional cases of conversion of natural forests or lasting transformation of plantations into agricultural use allowed by FSC, which is specifically beyond the control of the forest manager. We encourage you to look into this in detail after the presentation, and a reminder that we generally exceed EUDR in this regard. So in this advice note, clarifications are provided in the existing Advice Note 20-00702 to align the definition of primary forest with the most recent FAO definition. Since the consultation, the advice note has been revised to explain the need for this update, linking the existing term of primary forest with the EUDR that is also using the term, and to explain how FSC addresses requirements related to the conversion of primary forests to planted forests. Since the regulatory module introduces the regulatory claim, we need to include an advice note to outline for non-users of the regulatory module how they should control this claim. And as a reminder, this would be voluntary. We have updated terminology from specified and low risk to negligible and non-negligible risk across the FSC system, which is now included in this advice note. In addition, which risk assessments are applicable is outlined in it as well. This advice note is new since the consultation and is for certification bodies to be able to actually apply the related advice note in their evaluations. So conceptually, it's not that new, but rather complementary to the previous advice note. What this means is that within FSC, we are now saying that risk is either negligible or non-negligible, with the exception of high and low risk in reference to country benchmarking done by the EU Commission. Previously, we used the term specified and low risk in our controlled wood framework, so the advice note ensures the application of a consistent use of terminology around risk as outlined in the FSC Regulatory Module and Risk Assessment Framework, now aligned with EUDR language that uses the same terms related to risks that need to be assessed and mitigated. All of these changes are effective as of July 1 when applying the regulatory module. So for our other users, they are not effective until October, And then there's a transition end date to the end of 2025. So now let's speak briefly about FSC Aligned Certification for EUDR.
The EU Regulation on Deforestation-Free Products, or EUDR, is more than a policy. It's a commitment to a deforestation-free market, a promise to keep our forests standing and thriving. For those involved in the supply chain of key commodities, like wood and rubber, the EUDR places new obligations to perform due diligence, ensuring the origins of products are deforestation-free. It requires records and geolocation details. They're not just data points. They're storytelling elements of each product's journey. The Forest Stewardship Council aligns with the EUDR, sharing a vision for a sustainable future. For organizations, this means that FSC certification is now also your stepping stone to EUDR compliance. Introducing FSC Aligned Certification for EUDR. With a specialized regulatory module and a risk assessment framework, it's tailored to meet EUDR standards. It's time for action. It's time to reshape the market. Join us in protecting our forests and our future, because there's no time for business as usual when it comes to our planet. Are you ready to be part of the change? Visit fsc.org/starteudr to start your journey with the FSC and the EUDR. Together.
As mentioned in the video, we have two core components of FSC Aligned Certification for EUDR, comprising the FSC Regulatory Module, which then requires the usage of our FSC Risk Assessment Framework. It is a voluntary add-on standard where users need to demonstrate that products are deforestation-free, legal, and due diligence is demonstrated with a risk assessment and mitigation measures. Sound familiar? Well, remember this? So what the EUDR is requiring is reflected in our FSC Regulatory Module. Our team has spent the past year meticulously analyzing the clauses of EUDR to translate heavy regulatory requirements into a more familiar system. Luckily, as mentioned, many requirements of EUDR are already reflected in our certifications. So now any outstanding differences have been included into the FSC Regulatory Module to clearly articulate what you as a certificate holder actually need to do to use FSC certification to support EUDR compliance. As we know, the module is applicable for all certification types, including forest management, controlled wood, chain of custody, and our certification bodies, as it includes accreditation requirements. What we are doing with the regulatory module is outlining how users throughout the supply chain are to include due diligence with more information gathering, including geolocation, to align with EUDR requirements and receive a regulatory claim. Since it is just one standard, we have allocated different parts of the standard for different users, such as forest management and chain of custody. We have 3 annexes now, 2 being new since consultation. As the module predominantly focuses on organizations needing to comply with EUDR, it can still actually be used by organizations who are outside of the EU. So we've outlined which requirements such organizations would be exempt from in this annex. The second annex outlines what needs to be included in the due diligence statement provided to comply with the EUDR. And the third annex shows which indicators are relevant for FSC 100%, conducting a simplified risk assessment. While we did work quickly on this entire project, stakeholder feedback was indeed taken into consideration, resulting in some changes. We are working and will continue to work on explanatory material to support stakeholders. We tried to make the standard more simple and removed redundancies. And the annex about users outside of the EU was added based on stakeholder request. But let's hear from somebody closer to the results of the consultation. I'd now like to bring Saya Hoti, Program Manager of our Regulatory Framework team, who led the development of the regulatory module. So Saya, I talked about the success of the consultation and briefly reviewed some of the changes. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you saw in the results from the consultation?
Thank you, Janika, for taking us through this presentation so far. I can say a couple of words about the consultation results and what is the impression. What are the impressions that that I was left with when reading through them? So first of all, of course, just the extremely wide interest towards our solution and amazing dedication that that respondents showed in responding to the questions and providing us feedback and improvements on so many different things. So we had more than 2,000 open comments to go through in this process. And of course, the expert teams were the ones who then studied them very closely to look at what is the best way to finalize this document. So I just want to thank you again, everyone who devoted this time to help us to have a better final result after the consultation. The second impression that I got was that there are a lot of requests for tools and additional guidance on how to work with this regulatory module. Although it seems that it's relatively easy to plug into the existing certification as such, but then of course there's always this how to do that, and whatever helps would be considered a plus and very positive. So we've heard that, and of course we have already several tools that we are developing, tech tools and so on, and templates. But we will continue on this journey and continue developing these tools and trying to make it easier for any certificate holders to work with the regulatory module and the related requirements. The third one was that there were quite many questions about the other regulation, EUDR itself. Of course, FSC can only provide tool to help with compliance. And there were many questions about how will this be now enforced, and how will the European Commission implement this in certain situations. Of course, this is something that is not for FSC to respond to, but from our side, we are also actively seeking then clarifications if anything seems that would benefit from further clarification, and are also ready to then provide more guidance on how these new clarifications might fit with the FSC tools to help with the compliance. So these were my main impressions, Janika. Thank you for the questions, and looking forward to the next slides.
Great. Thank you for sharing what you learned and what you heard. So now let's look into the regulatory module a little bit deeper, starting with the additional requirements for forest management. The main changes include conducting due diligence. And good news is that FSC's forest management certification is in itself a risk mitigation activity. It hasn't come out yet, but the EU Commission will at some point release risk benchmarking to assign low, standard, or high risk to countries. For now, since the benchmarking does not exist, the default is standard risk requiring a risk assessment by operators. Putting that together for our forest managers, In a low-risk country, information collection is required, which includes geolocation. In standard or high-risk countries, forest managers are to collect the required information, but also conduct a risk assessment. Luckily, we are significantly helping our forest managers by providing a simplified risk assessment template. While the obligations of FSC 100%, which is products that originate from FSC certified forests, are indeed to perform due diligence, we've done a lot of the groundwork for our certificate holders. This is through the production of a simplified risk assessment template, which is based on the FSC risk assessment framework. There, we have included EUDR-related indicators and pre-filled them for easy use. What we mean by pre-filling is that we've already shown per indicator how FSC's forest management certification actually addresses the related risks. So the main obligation of organizations would be to collect the relevant information about what they're already doing under FSC certification in any case. And that can then be sent through the supply chain. So as mentioned, we've put this template to the test and already received some positive feedback. For example, here's Grupo Fortaleza confirming that implementing this simplified risk assessment template eased the complexity of compliance with EUDR by synthesizing the most essential elements into one template. To expand on this a little bit further, I would now like to bring Andres Venegas Soto, who is our technical expert for forest stewardship. So Andres, you participated significantly in the development of this simplified risk assessment template. And we are saying that we're doing a lot of the work here for our forest managers. But can maybe you elaborate a bit more as to how exactly we've done that?
Yeah, thank you, Hanika. Yeah, we have done a lot of work. I think since upon learning about the UDR test, the first thing that we do is do a really deep analysis in the UDR requirement to analyze how the FSC normative framework cover all the requirements and also identify the gaps between the FSC normative and the UDR. So once we identify the gaps, we develop immediately as you say, the two advice notes, one related to the certification of primary forest, and the other advice related to the deforestation-free product from the FSC certified management. Additionally, we develop 8 interpretation. With this new component, the good news or the positive news is FSC is fully aligned with the UDR requirement. Additionally, we work in the simplified risk assessment, which is the pre-filled template showing how each indicator related to deforestation-free and compliance with the relevant local legislation is covered by the FSC FM standard. Hence, the products certified of FSC 100% are in compliance with the UDR requirement. It means that are deforestation-free products. In summary, this simplified risk assessment is an easy tool that the FM certificate holder can use to show compliance with the UDR requirement. So, thank you, Janica.
Great. Happy to hear that. Thank you. Now, let's look into the additional requirements for our chain of custody users. In general, with the module, we have administrative and operational changes included. These are mainly about sales documentation, connecting product codes to harmonized system codes, and more. There are indeed different requirements for SME, which stands for small or medium enterprises, or non-SME, as well as traders and operators, and we've clearly indicated this with icons throughout the document per clause. The module is useful for both operators or traders, And of note that even within the EU, an operator can be somebody just changing the harmonized system code, which is when you change the product type. So specifically, an example here would be turning imported rubber into a tire. Speaking of harmonized system codes, users are to align with FSC product codes with the EUDR's harmonized system codes. Since FSC product types are more detailed and extensive, this regulatory module specifies the connection between the two systems, and for our ease of use by certificate holders, we have developed a crosswalk document to explicitly bridge the two coding systems and bring additional clarity for our users. This document has been published in the FSC Document Center, and we are including a link directly to it in the chat. So the main change for chain of custody users is demonstrating due diligence. Like discussed in the beginning and throughout this presentation, due diligence is paramount in EUDR. It is about demonstrating that products are deforestation-free, have been produced in accordance with the relevant legislation of the country of production, and covered by a due diligence statement. And due diligence is, of course, three main steps: information collection, conducting a risk assessment, and mitigating any non-negligible risk. But also about taking these three core steps of information collection, assessment, and mitigation, and understanding it all the way down to the forest level. When assessing and mitigating risk, users must use the full chain FSC risk assessment based on our risk assessment framework, which I will be discussing briefly momentarily. This is, of course, unless they are sourcing only from FSC certified forests, and in this case, they can instead use the simplified template just discussed by Andres. After concluding only negligible risk and before selling a product, the module outlines in this Annex 2 that an operator confirms the implementation of a due diligence system through a due diligence statement, which includes the information here, such as operator information, legal statement, and a due diligence statement reference number. And then this statement is used to demonstrate compliance with the EUDR and can be sent along the supply chain. A closer dive into a supply chain, let's take a look at the regulatory module in practice and take a sawmill as an example. By applying the regulatory module, they would have a clear outline of the requirements of EUDR and can incorporate them into their FSC certification. It also gives them the tools to assess the risk of origin as well as the risk of mixing when sourcing from the forest through using an FSC risk assessment. This makes due diligence for those further in the supply chain much easier as well. But those outside of FSC would be responsible for developing their own tools and systems to do the same work. But if sourcing from an FSC certified forest, the sawmill can do a simplified risk assessment using FSC's simplified risk assessment template. And like before, this supports users further down the supply chain as well, but they are still individually responsible for their own tools to demonstrate due diligence. The best scenario is when we have the entire supply chain using our FSC regulatory module from FSC certified forests. Here, from the forest to the logs to the products themselves, all the way to the retailer, all are using the same risk assessment and documenting the same information through the application of our regulatory module and FSC risk assessment. This is then called a fully verified supply chain. This means that every certificate holder has applied the regulatory module and established a product group for the purpose of controlling this regulatory plus claim. With the regulatory plus claim, users can make use of our promotional statements. And mainly, they can be assured that the additional work required to demonstrate due diligence is drastically less. Looking into the regulatory module as a whole, and starting from the forest level, note that FSC does indeed have this new regulatory claim that's been referenced. We've just been speaking about this claim, and it shows that inputs are exclusively of material assessed to be in conformity with the FSC regulatory module. Would now like to introduce another expert, which is Cesar Goncalves. And Cesar, I talked a bit about this fully verified supply chain, which is, of course, a really great application of our FSC tools. But what about the value of applying our regulatory module for our chain of custody users that are not in a fully verified supply chain?
Thank you, Janica. Indeed, as you explained, the ideal situation would be a fully verified supply chain. But nevertheless, the regulatory module on its own provides a useful framework aligned with the EUDR requirements, either to support with your own legal compliance or to assist your clients in their efforts. Of course, certificate holders that are operating outside the European Union are not legally bound, but they can unblock the market because the closer the assessment is to the source, the higher the chances for accurate information, and therefore the lower will be the risk. So personally, I would expect to see preferential procurement for products that have gone through this FSC due diligence system process, because sourcing from a supplier that has gone through a third-party verification, namely the certification bodies, really supports the plausibility of the information that is being received. And thanks.
Great. So we've talked a bit about the risk assessment and the regulatory module, which are some tools that can kind of provide a similar mindset and application of information. And for those that might not know, you used to be an auditor. So I wanted to see what is the value of the similar mindset actually on the ground.
Yes, so we do have this structure of these regulatory documents, regulatory module that is structured in the similar way that we have our chain of custody standards and the flow of the requirements. So, but first maybe to note that the drafting process that FSC went through was quite fast, and so it will be the implementation for the companies. So one key objective was to that we would have to transform or to translate the regulation into something that could be read by the certificate holders and, of course, by certification bodies. So in the module, we have used this similar structure, this flow of requirements. So the additions can indeed be easily detected. The DDS, for example, it's a simplified version and altered, of course, of the controlled wood standards. This means that at the company level, they will be using a similar mechanism that has been tried and tested in the standard 4005, controlled wood, sourcing controlled wood, and those applying these standards can merge the concepts, update their procedures, and use one DDS for both control woods and the regulatory module product groups. And on a certification body level, this means that an auditor that has control wood experience after training in the module, of course, should be able to be up to speed very quickly.
Great. Thank you for sharing. And I am sure we'll be hearing from you with more questions from participants today. Thank you. So a little bit more about auditing and certification bodies is that a change since the consultation is that now it is voluntary for our certification bodies to be accredited for the regulatory module. And those that choose to add it must already have chain of custody controlled wood in their scope, as this expertise required is the same, which is what Cesar just spoke about. Certification bodies that want to add the regulatory module to their scope of accreditation should contact Assurance Services International and get a desk audit. FSC will be publishing a list of available certification bodies in our promotional material to make it easy for our certificate holders to find the relevant certification body. This change from voluntary to mandatory is based on the consultation and provides flexibility for our certification bodies to adapt their systems while certificate holders can simultaneously start preparing themselves for the new requirements. And I did want to quickly review the responsibilities of the certification body versus the competent authority. So our certification bodies are only evaluating conformity against the regulatory module. It is ultimately up to the competent authority to actually determine your EUDR compliance. As such, any non-compliance with the EUDR is the responsibility of the certificate holder, not the certification body. Nonetheless, there are some few requirements for information sharing between the parties outlined on the slide here, where it is still the certificate holder's responsibility to inform the competent authority and certification body of any nonconformities and noncompliances. We've also published an updated FSC risk assessment framework, which you've heard a lot about. For the risk assessment and mitigation part of applying a due diligence system, we have our existing robust framework, recently also now aligned with the EUDR. This framework is a procedure outlining how to credibly assess and mitigate risk based on the sourcing location. We have a template already for assessing and mitigating risk ready for you to use. This is complemented by a reference document with sources of information to ensure that credible and vetted sources of information are used. Using our FSC risk assessment framework is integral for the usage within the regulatory module. We've also already started developing country risk assessments, which will take a lot of the burden off of our certificate holders supplying from those areas. In short, the steps outlined in the procedure to develop the risk assessment include determining the scope by identifying the location being assessed, then gather and assess relevant information with a reminder that we already have a strong database for information available, determine to what scale, such as by region or by country, that the risk will be assessed, and exactly what source types are used. Then, designate a risk as either negligible or non-negligible. And where there is non-negligible risk, these risks, of course, shall be mitigated by establishing appropriate mitigation measures. For organizations sourcing FSC controlled wood using FSC Standard 40005, which are requirements for sourcing FSC controlled wood and not conforming with the regulatory module, the existing FSC risk assessments will remain valid until replaced by the revised FSC risk assessment, as specified in Advice Note 40-00526. But for our regulatory module users, the revised risk assessment framework is immediately effective. I will assume that you might have some questions about this, and we would then like to invite you to next week's webinar, where we will dive deeper into the risk assessment framework and have a dedicated question and answer session then. So why should you choose FSC Aligned Certification for EUDR? Well, as mentioned, we've translated a heavy regulation into a system that is fairly known by certificate holders through existing certification requirements, so that our users are not alone in facing a magnitude of understanding and navigation of this regulation. We have a built-in natural progression because FSC certification isn't just a strong mitigation measure, but it makes EUDR compliance so much easier for forest managers and also those sourcing from FSC certified forests. We probably all understand that forest management certification is by no means easy. And how extensive and strong our forest management certification already is against this new regulation is a testament to our 30 years of experience. Our system is built on credible third-party assurance, and our already existing and robust controlled risk assessment framework is now even stronger. But let's look at FSC as a natural stepping stone for EUDR. We've heard that EUDR is particularly difficult for smallholders, and that in a supply chain such as rubber, it makes EUDR compliance even more difficult, as there are multiple sources and complex supply chains, making traceability extremely challenging. For this, I would like to introduce Sean Nyquist. And a very simple question for you, Sean. Is EUDR impossible? And why do you think not, if so?
Right. I do not believe that it's impossible. I would, of course, admit that it's a challenge, but I can share an experience from last week that's quite encouraging, having seen an FSC certified group of smallholders. So this is a picture of cup lumps of rubber in Thailand being sold to a chain of custody certified rubber factory. In the back of the photo, you can see the more common way to receive rubber with no differentiation between farmers. What you can see in the front is a bucket for each farmer with their unique identifier. And using this approach for additional traceability, they can collect data from each farmer and pass it down the supply chain as it is converted to finished goods such as tires. This is an FSC certified group entity called Agriac, which is managing about 5,000 smallholders in Thailand with over 70 collection points. This type of traceability was considered unrealistic until recently, so it's quite encouraging to see these developments. Now, when this rubber factory sells FSC 100% to operators in the EU, it can utilize the simplified risk assessment template that was designed by FSC. The tool simplifies the task of conducting risk assessments for FSC certified forest managers, as well as those downstream, such as this rubber factory in the picture, who sell FSC 100%. So I do believe it's possible.
Great. So we have hope. Thank you for sharing. Very inspiring. And this isn't the only company that we've actually been speaking with. When starting our work on EUDR solution, we knew it would be a significant change into how we usually operate here at FSC. We've launched the Early Adopter Program. In its first phase, we chose 22 companies out of 200 applicants to ensure diversity across geography, industry, and size. So I would now like to review some of the results of this program by speaking with Terry Campbell, who is our senior expert in chain of custody. So Terry, if you could just briefly share about what is your general impression so far when showing these tools to existing certificate holders? And also if you could mention, I've been talking a lot that the regulatory module is easier to read than a regulation. Is this confirmed?
Yeah, thanks, Yannicka. Yes, the short answer on that is most definitely. If anyone's tried to read the regulation, you'd be hard pressed to figure out how it would apply to your company. And this has been mentioned by many of our colleagues already, but we've really analyzed the regulation and structured the regulatory module in a way that is very familiar for certificate holders to review and look for integration into their system, so their management system. So yeah, I think the short answer is yes. This document definitely makes it easier to understand how you can become aligned with the EUDR requirements. Other findings that we're learning out there, they're really industry specific. We've, as you saw already, we've worked with a wide variety of certificate holders in different industries, and I think that the main questions we've been getting are a lot to do with some of the questions still remaining for the EU, to be honest, and so Our solutions have been well received, and people are starting to integrate them in a draft form into their management system. And they're starting to consider using the risk assessment framework in assessing risk in that second step of their due diligence system. But some of the things that keep the early adopter program people awake at night are still some of these questions that we're all waiting for the EUDR to answer. And hopefully they will here soon with this next round of FAQs and guidance documents. So it's been an interesting experience. And yeah, I'm definitely here to say that the tools we've put together are certainly allowing certificate holders to approach this big challenge and understand what they need to do.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, and I hope you can get some sleep again shortly. So just a quick reminder before we wrap up about what has been published. We've published 3 sets of normative documents as of just a few days ago on July 1st. And this includes our FSC Regulatory Module, the Risk Assessment Framework, and Advice Notes. And as a reminder, all of these changes are immediately effective as of July 1 when you are applying the regulatory module. And for our other users, they will not be effective until October with a transition end date to the end of 2025. We know that there's a lot more to explore with the risk assessment framework, and again, invite you to an upcoming webinar, which will be held in just 1 more week. To complement our normative documents being published, we've also developed supplemental material to begin to try and meet the needs of our stakeholders as we all continue to try and understand the requirements and what we are offering. We will continue publishing even more material and guidance to support you on this journey, including a dynamic website to guide you through this at the existing FSC EUDR journey webpage. And as mentioned earlier in this webinar, this is being recorded and will be made available as well. And let's start with how you can already take advantage of what's available and what's to come in the addition of the variety of webinars, such as next week. So FSC Aligned Certification for EUDR is now available. And this includes the 2 main core components of our FSC Regulatory Module and FSC Risk Assessment Framework. With the links in the chat, you can find dedicated web pages with more resources and understanding to get started with both today. And we encourage you to inform your certification body that you are interested in the module, noting that their capacity will likely be limited based on increased demand. So it's important that you get in touch with them as soon as possible. And let's look ahead in just a few weeks in August, then we will be launching this dynamic website, which I just spoke about. And in the meantime, we've also identified some core steps that you can be taking, which is being sent in the link in the chat, about 6 steps that companies can take today to support your compliance journey to EUDR. We also have a really quick brief survey. If you don't mind dedicating a moment to quickly share some feedback, you can scan the QR code here with your phone or use the link that will be posted in the chat. Really appreciate your input, so thank you in advance as we look ahead to develop continued materials. And with that, I would now like to get started with our question and answers component of today's webinar. And as a brief reminder, I see a lot of questions already in the chat or with the Q&A feature, but please be sure to upvote those that are also interested in so that we can prioritize effectively and keep them coming. So with that, I would now like to hand over the presentation to Saya Hoti, who will guide us through this part.
Thank you so much, Janica. And I'm sure that many of your questions were already answered and responded to through this presentation. that Janica gave, and with the expert interviews here and there as well. But of course, this also might have triggered new questions for you, which we are happy to take on. The team has also been responding to some of the questions in a written format during the presentation and continues to do so. But let's take some of the more popular ones that have been upvoted the most and ask our experts live answers to these questions so that we can hear firsthand. But first, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Parmida Daniali, who will be helping me with these questions and reading them out loud so that also our interpretation then keeps on the same page with us on what we are discussing here with the given question. So, Palmira, do we have some questions already that we could start going through?
Hello, Saya and everyone. Yes, we have quite a few questions. So I'll start with the questions that received the highest votes. So the first question is, how will a company at the end of the chain, such as a printing company, guarantee the forest management coordinates are basically accurate? Because there are many possibilities for coordinates and companies have many suppliers.
Thank you, Parmida. Sounds like a question that that many companies are asking themselves at the moment, and it also sounds like a question that would be best responded to by Cesar. So could I invite you back to the floor, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, Saya. So this, in fact, is a quite complex question because it first sits with what the regulation says. And we at FSC, we were trying to mimic more or less the same requirements. But it is also complex because we first have to understand who is this company. Is the company an operator importing or exporting or transforming the products, or it is a trader where it sits within the supply chain, and what kind of information is this company will be receiving from the suppliers? Because of course the regulation and then the FSC Regulatory Module says that the coordinates have to be recorded and transferred when needed, but different requirements apply depending on what type of company you are. So as I mentioned, there are two main groups, let's call it user groups, operators and traders, and then each one of them may be an SME or a non-SME. For simplification, let's call it big companies and small companies. So in this, collecting these coordinates might be applicable to part of these groups, mainly the operators, but then the small companies may not be required. But what we say in the module is that the supply chain has to flow and the information has to flow. So between the supplier and the client, this information has to be collected and provided. So the supply chain will trigger this necessity. So you will require this to your supplier, the supplier will require to the sub-supplier. And on top of these requirements, because this is the standard, that's why FSC also has the FSC Trace, or what we were usually before calling it the blockchain technology. That's this huge amount of information that may happen with these composite products like paper, that can be hundreds, thousands of coordinates. Within this technology, this information can flow the supply chain very easily. It does not need to be paper-based. So that is one of the tools that FSC can propose or is proposing to help companies in transferring this information from the forest level up to or down to the last nodes in the supply chain.
Thank you, Cesar. Wonderful. I think that clarified many aspects of this question. Already, we might, however, encounter the same question from different angles going forward. Let's see if we come back to that or not. Palmina, what do we have next in line?
So the next question is about a case that they're having their external audits this year in October. And according to their auditor, the regulatory module cannot be implemented this year. And they're wondering if they need a separate audit for the regulatory module, or it's sufficient to include the audit into 2025.
Okay, thank you. So we are discussing the audits and how is it possible to get certified against regulatory module. Of course, certification bodies are getting accredited themselves and getting prepared at the moment. So the timelines might vary a little bit. But maybe Cesar, I could invite you back for a few minutes to talk about how that works. What needs to be done exactly in this audit?
Absolutely. I think the stakeholder already did the first step, which is engage, talk with the certification body when it will be possible to actually plan this scope extension. Let's call it scope extension or evaluation and not necessarily an audit. Because this extension towards the regulatory module, as we said, it is a voluntary standard. So there are no transitions. So the company decides when they want to add this standard to their scope of activity. So of course, it's very important to align with the certification body when they will be ready. Maybe sooner or later, we all are adapting, the companies are adapting their systems, certification bodies indeed are adapting their systems, but it's not like FSC is forcing or certification bodies are forcing these evaluations or scope extensions to be conducted. It's first up to the company to decide the when and then to agree with the certification body when it is possible. Picking up one of my first comments is that I'm calling it evaluation because it will depend on this company again. So companies with more complex systems, of course, the certification body will need to do further assessments to check that in fact the system is ready and put in place. And for companies that are let's call it working in activities that are simpler or they fit into this non-SME trader, lighter evaluations may occur to this scope extension, but it always vary between depending who you are, where you are, what is your supply chain. So again, first step to talk with the certification body.
Perfect, thank you. I think that clarified that part. So, Palmira, do we have more chain of custody related questions on the top?
Maybe more on the forest management level, or so the highest voted question right now is that how would you ensure end-to-end traceability data flow from forest managers to downstream customers if not all your suppliers choose to use this tool?
Thank you. I would still put this for a chain of custody expert to respond to. So Cesar, if you could still talk a little bit about this end-to-end traceability, and maybe this has something to do with two different kinds of claims as well as that we have in the system now. There were some other questions there too, and after that we can go into our forest management questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I already mentioned the FSC Trace as a tool to pass the information. I think that is the key value of things. But let's look into the regulatory module in an isolated way. You will notice that we have a section for compliance with timber legality that adds on top of the already existent section 6 on 4004 that talks about the same thing. And there we are much more prescriptive in terms of what exactly has to be collected and provided to the next client and so forth in the supply chain. So on a regulatory module perspective, it's quite clear that this information has to follow and what exactly this information is. Now, if you are referring to suppliers and sub-suppliers that you have these breaks in the supply chain that they don't use the module, still the standard 4004 in their section 6 has some sort of a provision that basically says that we cannot block the compliance with timber legality, right? So your suppliers and sub-suppliers cannot omit when information when that information is legally required. So that is another way that an FSC certified supply chain can still support you in your EUDR journey, let's call it. And then, of course, as you asked for the claims, when you have, as Yannicka explained, when you have all the links with the module, you can have this FSC 100%/regulatory plus. When you don't, you can still have the regulatory claim. And what if you are not yet willing to go for the regulatory module, but you are still sourcing this material? So company A goes for the regulatory module, company B is not yet there, but then perhaps your client, company C, would like to have to source this claim, although you don't go for the regulatory module. You can still do it. That was one of the advice notes that Yannicka mentioned. And that will help this company C to address the risk of mixing, to avoid that material that was already assessed and considered negligible, not to be mixed with non-negligible or non-assessed material. So there are a few ways that the companies, whether with the regulatory module or not, can still support each other.
Thank you, Cesar. So I'd like to go into a little bit different topic now. I can see that there are a couple of questions that maybe we can combine and invite Andres from the forest management side to talk a little bit about, and it has to do with FSC 100% and what happens with that type of material at the very beginning of the supply chains that can be then utilized by the other links in the chain going forward, and maybe link this to the simplified risk assessment template as well. There are some comments about that. So maybe you could just say a few words that what happens on that level.
Yeah, we'll be try to be short, but yeah, it's because there are different elements. I think Cesar explained really well. There are different scenarios because there are some scenarios in which the company play the operator role. It means that there's under a UDR scope. In that case, the company, in any case, need to comply with the 2DS or implement the due diligence. So that is mean that they also have to collect information and do the risk assessment in case of the countries have the standard high risk category. But even that, if they have FSC 100%, they just can use the simplified risk assessment, which means that it's pre-filled template which already are all the indicator today I fill in, proving that most of the indicators are negligible. So basically, they just can use that template to provide this risk assessment component from UDR. Also, if they are not part of the scope, also they can use the simplified risk assessment. In that case, no, they don't need to comply with the UDR requirement in terms of the mandatory, but in a voluntary way, they can use it to support the client with all the information that they need to collect.
Okay, Thank you, Andres. Now we've heard a little bit about what happens at the very source of this material and how to work with the simplified risk assessment, which is it's a template. There are many different rows in there as well, but they are mostly pre-filled because those different requirements are already filled by our core certification requirements, and the template builds the connection to those requirements so that it's possible to then show further along in the supply chain. Okay, I'd like to hand back to Palmira to see that's where the questions will take us next.
So the next question is, the EUDR requires that an independent audit be carried out to validate the information. I would like to know if the certifier's annual audit will be sufficient, or we'll have to hire an independent audit.
If the audit includes the regulatory module, yes, then we do believe and trust that this is this will fulfill this requirement of independent audit of these different features, which is of course great because as a certificate holder, you are already set up to have that audit and can just extend your scope to include that. Okay, thanks. Let's move to the next one.
It was mentioned that FSC Trace will be free. Is it just to use the system at a basic level? Will there be another level that makes reporting and data collection easier? If so, will this be an extra cost?
Okay, so FSC Trace, as was mentioned, we will be having a specific webinars on the FSC Trace, the blockchain system that FSC is developing at the same time. So I would invite you all to participate in those webinars to find out more about the details. Today, we don't have any FSC Trace experts with us when we are mainly talking about the regulatory module, but maybe a few words about the costs are in order here as well. So the idea has been that the basic features will be free, of course, for FSC certificate holders. But then, of course, like further we develop this this system, there might be some additional features that might have been might have some costs and price attached to them. But the basic features to get the other core work done should be free of charge. Okay, I think that's pretty much everything we can say about FSC Trace in this webinar. Let's see if we have something else that we could invite our experts to discuss today.
So we have a question about FSC control wood, and they're asking, is there any limitation with FSC control wood? Will it be considered a higher risk?
Okay. Cesar, would you like to come back and talk a little bit more about the other different types of sources and inputs, please?
Yes, absolutely. So by default, the answer is no. Control wood is not different from FSC mix, but both are indeed different from FSC 100%. And I guess that was clear from the presentation, and the reason why we do have a simplified risk assessment for FSC 100%, and we do have the complete risk assessment with 64 indicators for FSC mixed products, FSC control woods, and the control material that is being sourced under the standards 14005 sourcing control woods. So by default, it's no different, but still, as the EUDR is requiring assessing this risk for any kind of product, certified or not, Still, we have to make sure that all the requirements are aligned with. And that was the process from the changes that we saw with the risk assessment framework to ensure that we do have this alignment. And for the users of the regulatory module, these changes are effective from the same moment. Okay, so it will not be penalized if that was the intention. It's just FSC control wood and FSC mix for the reasons that we are assessing the risk a little bit far from the source. Companies do have to screen those risk indicators and to assess and analyze if there is a negligible risk.
Thank you so much for this additional clarification on that aspect. Palmira, what does the question? Do we still have questions left? I think so.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
So we have a question about geolocation. So the question is, has geolocation and time of production been defined so that a common format can be passed along the supply chain? We are a forest management COC certified forest in US. I want to make sure that we can produce this information if asked.
Yes, so I do believe that we provide some guidance on this in the regulatory module on how to do that. EUDR also has some guidance on how to format those. So I would then propose maybe to look into the regulations and for more specific guidance on how to do that. Okay, should we go forward?
Yes. So the next question is, will an EUDR non-compliance affect a certificate holder's FSC certification?
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, this is an interesting question. Maybe I can start answering this and then see if any of the colleagues would like to add to that. So this regulatory module is an independent add-on in a sense that it can be switched on and it can be switched off. And if there then are non-conformances against the regulatory module, that alone does not impact the status of the core certification. Say that's a chain of custody certified operation, then gets a non-conformance against the regulatory module. It's not able to close it. Then it doesn't necessarily mean that their chain of custody certification as such is impacted. But this might depend a little bit on what the non-conformance was about and whether this is something that is already included in the chain of custody standard or the relevant certification standard as such, but it is just something that was found under the regulatory module to start with. So of course there is a possibility, for example, around the legality questions, that there might be a connection to the chain of custody standard. I'm looking at my colleagues to see if there is someone who would like to add to the question. Not entirely, and not seeing that right now. So let's move to the next question.
There are many interpretations of EUDR. Does FSC have a concrete interpretation of EUDR before scoping and evaluation of risks?
Well, this is of course a interesting question. EU is the only one who was able to provide interpretations around their own requirements, and of course we will be monitoring that and also asking for more clarity if needed. The regulatory module and also the other risk assessments, they now represent our best understanding of what EUDR requires the companies to do who operate or import or export materials to European Union. Maybe that was not sure if we can say much more about this this point of time, because we are then aligning with EUDR as more clarifications will come. So Palmira.
Okay, so the next question is, will this allow end retailers to ultimately see the details of which forests were sourced from inputs used for FSC certified products?
Now I have a little bit of a difficulty following this. Could you repeat, please, the question?
Sure. Will this regulatory module allow end retailers to ultimately see the details of which forests were sourced from inputs used for FSC certified products?
Okay, so I believe that this is a question about then retailers and organizations that are not part of the certified supply chain at the moment, who also, of course, have obligations around EUDR if they are importing into the European Union. At the moment, our solution is only for our certified organization. So, of course, as a retailer, it's possible to get certified and participate in supply chains, and then you would receive this information if your suppliers are also part of the part of this regulatory module. We don't have, at least yet, a solution directly to our promotional license holders, which is the system we have for retailers who are not changing the products, but only bringing this into the end consumers most of the time. But we are looking into that possibility to see that how could we offer similar type of guidance for them how to deal with this situation. And I think Cesar might want to say something additional to this question.
Yes,
so please.
I think, yeah, the origin of this question might be with regards with one of the articles in the EUDR. It's 4.7, if my notes don't are accurate. That it says basically that an operator has to help others in the supply chain. So if this retailer will also be within the scope of the EUDR, the suppliers will have to collect and provide the information. So they will still fit within the EUDR framework. And because of that, we do have a clause in the regulatory module that says, well, upon request, collect and provide the information to operators and the traders further down the supply chain. So if this retailer will fit within the EUDR, the regulatory framework, they would indeed be able to, or theoretically, they will be able to receive all the information, including the species, geolocation of all plots of land that the material originates from, the date and time range of harvest, the statements, the due diligence statements, and even the results from the risk assessments. So yes, within the regulation, it is possible that this happen, and as well within the FSC regulatory module.
Thank you so much. I think that was much better answer than in the end and clarified this further. Thank you so much for that clarification. I did see a question about deforestation definition and whether that applies to everyone or not. Palmira, do you have that question ready somewhere that you could read out? And then Andres, I would invite you to please say a few words about that after Parmida has read the question so that it's clear to everyone, please.
Sure. So the question is the change to the definition of deforestation to align with the EUDR a mandatory change for all certificate holders or a change for the EUDR regulatory module?
Yeah, that is a good question. The first things element is the FSC, in order to be aligned with the UDR, they create two interpretations related to the deforestation definition and also the advice note number 24 related to the deforestation-free products. That is even if they are aligned with the UDR, but apply for all the FM certificate holder.
Yes, thank you. And this is advice note that that is now effective for regulatory module users immediately, but for other certified organizations, the effective date is only 1st of October, and there is also transition period with these advice notes until end of next year. So there is then time to change the operations. Earlier there was also a question about these timelines a little bit when we are referring to EUDR full compliance date, which is in December this year. But then some of our advice notes that apply to all of our certificate holders. We have a transition period until end of next year for them to also bring their operations in line. And I trust this was already clarified in a written format, but I still wanted to mention that because it's very important when we are discussing this this topic. I think these were the questions that we had time for today to take in this live section. There are still questions there that have not been answered, but not to worry. We have a plan for those questions as well. I would like to thank everyone for sending in such wonderful, great questions. Also helps us to understand which parts we need to be able to communicate better and more clearly, and what is on your mind at the moment, so that we can then better adjust our own actions and try to help you in this journey. I would like to now hand back to Janika, who will be sharing with us a few words about the next steps. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Saya. And again, thank you to everybody for your participation today, including, of course, our colleagues on the call today. As mentioned by Saya, these additional questions are going to be used as input into our next version of our frequently asked questions document. And with the links in the chat, we encourage you to stay informed on upcoming developments. And as you hopefully learned at our launch webinar last week, this of course remains a priority of FSC. So we are here to maintain or continue being your partnerships on this journey. And with that, looking forward to your continued participation and stay in touch. And thank you all again.